I was sitting one day watching Pastor Jakes give a sermon. And Pastor Jakes was doing a sermon on Esau and his brother. And Pastor Jakes said Esau did not value his birthright and that he gave it up. And Pastor Jakes said, what you do not value, you will give it up easily. For some reason that stuck with me. And it led me to want to know more about what you don't value and how you will give it up so easily. Like what you don't value, what you have no interest in, or what you have no care about. It really just got to me. It pricked me a little bit. So I wanted to know more about what you don't value. How can you just give it up so easily? And what you do value, how you hold it and how you cherish it. And with doing so, it led me to study two men that are different in so many ways. It led me to look at Job and David. So different. Job is known as a righteous man, and David is known after God's own heart. But David is not like Job. David is a man that had a lot of mishaps. I mean, if you get the chance, I would, love for you to read the book of David. Because David have adventure, it has drama, it has crime, it has music notes, it has action. David is full of a lot of things. But what David values is God. He really values God. Even when David says his prayer to God, you can just, he's straightforward with God. He's just like, I can't, you know who I am, Lord. He tells him, oh sovereign Lord, you know who I am. He lets him know, I'm not that guy. I don't come off as that guy. I have my problems and I have my situations. I mean, I don't go to church every Sunday. I don't see things like that. I mean, when you hear his prayer is so in depth and honest with the Lord. He was just like, do you treat everyone this way? I mean, go to Solomon. Go to Solomon. I think it's First Solomon, chapter 7. Go to Solomon chapter 7. You will see this conversation and we see this prayer. You will see this prayer. And he's like, Lord, do you treat everyone this way? Is this how you treat everybody? Because he's blown, his mind is blown because Nape had just told him what the Lord is going to do for him. Nape had just explained to him how God is going to just bless his family and his next son to come. And David is like, man, do you know, David in his prayer said, do you know who I know you know who I am. You know me. You know me. I'm not that guy that sits in Bible study. I'm not that guy that gets up and go to church school. I'm not that guy that will come to choir rehearsal. That's Job. Job does all those things. But yet, when you think about the value where he holds God in his heart, when I got to looking at it, and I looked at it, and I got to looking at it, and I just kept looking at it, and I was like, why would God call David, or why would the prophet refer to David as a man after God's own heart? And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that God is the God of the heavenly army. The Bible refers to God as the God of the heavenly army. And David is a warrior. He's a king. He anointed him as king. He is a warrior. He fights. He leads people. He is a man imaged after God. Because God is the God of the heavenly army, and David he's a sergeant. He's not a soldier, he's a sergeant. He's a guy that put out orders and control soldiers. So when you compare the two in that way, he is a man after God's own heart. When you compare the two that way, he is a man after God's own heart. When you compare him that way. But when you really read the book of David, David has a lot of things that he does wrong, but his value, how he holds God in high regard. He says a prayer one time, he said, against you, Lord, against you only has I sinned. And it just kept me thinking how we don't value the things we have. We don't value our family as much. We don't value our friends as much. We don't value things that is important to us. Our mothers and fathers. David had a great thing happen to him, a great blessing. He came from the back to the front. He was a sheep guy, watching over sheep, and what we would call in today's living, we would call it struggling. We would call it living in poverty almost. And God took him from there and put him in the castle. Blew his mind. Some would say that David started to sin and David started to lose sight when everything got comfortable for him. When everything got easy for David, he lost sight of his biblical prayer, of his prayer life, and of the way he's supposed to think. He had nothing to really fight anymore. It became cushy to him. And then there's some just say that's just who he was. That's just who he is. That's just David. But if you remind and recall that when he was back in the day, when he was fighting, knocking out bears and lions and taking on Goliath, David was strong in his faith and strong in his thing. And fighting Saul and taking on enemies. He was a warrior. And then God tell Nathan that he done took care of all his enemies. He done put him in the castle and gave him his master's house. Now he sits on top of the throne and there is nothing for him to do. He finds himself in a dangerous place, which is called idle time. He has no more to fight. Unlike Job, where Job, idle time, he spent studying. He spent praying. He spent going to church. He spent in Bible study. He spent in church school. He spent his time sharpening himself, getting his tools right. David spent his idle time relaxing. And this is what led up to Bathsheba. This is what led him sitting on top of a roof, looking across and seeing a naked woman. He didn't spend his time studying. He didn't spend his time conversing with God. It's come back to that thing what Pastor Jake said. What you value, you hold at a high regard. And David held God at a high regard. He really did. But he didn't spend a lot of time studying it with it, studing himself, sharpening himself. It's amazing when you study both men. Both men, life is very similar. If you look at it, it's like looking at one life in reverse, and it's like looking at another life forward. Because David went from the back to the front, and Job went from the front to the back. Because Job had a lot of stuff. When you read this book of Job, Job came out having money. Put it in today's language, Job had money, car, houses. He had the job. He had it all. And one day, God told Satan, you can test him. Job went from having it all to having nothing. And David went from having nothing to having it all. But both men value God.